AJ toy. Once you think that he's like she. Is it on her scribble email? No, it's the boundaries site, and now they're talking about how we should. Let him focus on that. Just let him focus on that until after July. Okay, thank you. Are we ready? Oh, hey, Dr. Student. Call the meeting to order. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Since we're in person, all of us, I did not need to establish a quorum. We didn't have anyone wishing to address the school board. I would just like to introduce to everyone at Southeast Tech College who maybe have not met Dr. Stavum, the new superintendent of the school board. I know she's met with Dr. Griggs, but I don't know if she's met with everyone else. So thanks for joining us today. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes of the June 3rd, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes pass. Approval of agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approval of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We have approved the agenda. There were no new conflicts of interest presented. I'll move on to approval of the consent agenda items 8A through D. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We have approved the consent agenda. Now to the reports of the president. Public hearing on the FY21 proposed budget. We'll have Rich speak first, and we'll open up the public hearing.
All right, President Mickelson, members of the board, this is the public hearing for the tentative adoption of Southeast Tech's FY21 budget. This is really a follow-up to the presentation I made at May 26th board meeting. Not a lot of changes at this point, so I won't run you through the whole thing and spend the whole 40 minutes since those guys have an over and under on me on whether I'm going to be 10 minutes or not. So we'll see. We'll see who exchanges money afterwards. Just a couple things on the kind of basic assumptions as we moved in this tentative adoption. When we presented on May 26, we talked about we had not yet rolled in the per student allocation adjustment of the 2%. That still is not reflected at this tentative adoption. I'll get to kind of the reasons why we're taking a conservative approach on that. Second piece in the legislative appropriation and funding was capital equipment. We didn't know what our exact allocation was, but between the 4 technical colleges, it was 1.5 million. So we haven't factored and rolled that into it. And there's a reason why for that as well, again, on this conservative approach. Still the big unknown for us as we head into this fall term is who's going to show up. How many students are actually going to commit to what we know today. The enrollment is still pacing out ahead of where it was last year at 5%, so that's a good sign. It's a positive today. That's similar to the numbers I presented to you 45 days ago. So that continues to hold. But as I mentioned at that date, there's no cost to taking the off-ramp. So what actually happens, if we see a spike in cases, people may start to make some different decisions. You'll hear some different conversations about our plans that we have. We're rolling that out on how to resume operations. Obviously, we're closely tied to what CDC and the South Dakota Department of Health, and we even are engaging the local health officials with the City of Sioux Falls Health Department. So the intent is to resume operations as we normally would have them. But again, there's assumptions there. There's always a conservative approach. Still a little bit unknown on if there's going to be a legislative special session or not. We been told that, yeah, you can count on that money, you can rely on that. So I think that'll be good. So when we bring the final adoption in September, a couple things. We'll know where we're at on those appropriations. We will have a better sense of our fall enrollment numbers too, because we'll be past the drop add period, so we'll know kind of what we anticipate, where we will end up. The reason, and then we can blend in those dollars at that time. If for some reason enrollment drops off through that drop add period, that PSA money that will be coming forward with the state appropriation, that becomes a buffer for us. It creates an opportunity that, okay, if our revenue is declining, we haven't programmed those dollars as of today. So that gives us the flexibility to turn around and program them. On the capital equipment, in the budget this year, we are utilizing some of our own funds for capital equipment. It's not all federal dollars. Again, if the enrollments decline, but the state appropriation comes, we can supplant, because it's not federal dollars or state dollars, our own dollars with that state funding that's going to come forward, and that gives us, again, a little more of a buffer. So that's kind of the premise of why we haven't rolled that into this yet. We haven't specifically programmed it. We're leaving it on the table as a conservative approach if we start to see a decline. The opposite side of that is we programmed it and we see that decline. Now we're into a whole lot different conversation about how do we react to those cuts in the very near term. Just think this is a better strategy going forward. With that said, I knew how to run a computer, we would get to actually look at this stuff. Bear with me, sorry.
I'm going to ask questions. What is, remind me what the first day of school is for Southeast Tech? Same as public school. And then when is the last drop date for the class?
It'll be 2 weeks into the term, so I'm not sure what is the exact start date. I think it's sooner than that.
That's right, that's the last.
Is it? Okay. So we'll probably look to push our meeting back into past that date, right, to allow us to make those adjustments. Huh.
I had lunch with Jack Colbeck.
Yeah, where's our IT guy?
Break it.
Yeah, I did. So this cuts in on my over and under time. Yeah, maybe it's the mouse.
I did have lunch with Jack Colbeck yesterday from the legislature, and he also stated that they are not planning to have a reconvening of the legislature on budget. So, and that's talking with appropriations. So let's keep our fingers crossed, but that's what he said yesterday. Yes.
There we go. It's a little messy, but simply let it go. Sure. Maybe. All right.
Thanks, Eric. Eric's there, Ryan.
He's got the over on the bed, so that's why he set this thing up. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, he set it up so I'd go over the 10 minutes. We haven't changed our enrollment projections, as I stated. We are, again, pacing ahead of comparable time to last year with new incoming students. So that's a good thing. So we haven't revised this. If you recall, the modeling that I use is to tend to look backwards in the last 12 months of what our enrollments are and then project any growth in new programs. So that's what's reflected here. And again, in September, maybe there'll be some adjustments to this, but so far, everything's looking good and maybe even be a little bit of an uptick on that. Nothing's changed in the terms of the proposed rates. The State Board of Technical Education, as you're aware of, sets our tuition rate, so that's holding steady at 121. Our budget's not asking for anything on the local level, so that stays the same. The only increase to students this year is a $1 per credit And that was set by the Board of Technical Education, and that's on the facility fee. So that's to provide a funding mechanism for the debt service on our system-wide construction projects. And then there was just a shift in that state outreach fee. They moved that over into an M&R category to be used and dedicated towards maintenance and repair on the campuses. But overall, the increased cost to students is $1 a credit, which is, in I think my 16 years, unprecedented. I don't think we've ever had one that low. So hopefully for students, that'll be a positive. On the revenue side of things, the only thing that's changed from the May 26th is we firmed up our Perkins federal allocation. So you'll see that come up by $69,000, $70,000. So from a revenue standpoint, this is the only change from the prior presentation. The budget, looking at it revenues-wise, is fairly flat, obviously, with a $1 increase in credits and overall credits being relatively the same. That's what you would expect to see. The changes from the prior year related to the state really have to do with some one-time funding. The $500,000 in GOED for the construction project that's underway. That obviously doesn't carry over in FY21. There was some one-time money coming from the state, which was actually that old outreach fee that the state had held. They had some funds in that. They dispersed that, and we've received all of it. So it's all here.
Outstanding.
Yeah, we just got the last check this last week. So we have been made whole on that aspect. So those are the big changes. Other on the state side of it was the Board of Regents Gen Ed agreement. Talked about that before. That has sunsetted. We'll be looking at a different mechanism for that, but we no longer are required to transfer the tuition that we collect to them. Conversely, they are no longer required to pay us for our instructional classes or instructional costs in delivering those transferable gen ed classes. So you'll see a reduction on the expenditure side that is offset between these two. And really for us, it was a good thing because we were sending more to them than we were getting back. So that's had a positive impact on the development of this budget this year. Again, the breakout, clearly the majority of it is really credit-based, and I've talked about that before, in tuition, in fees, charges to students, but also our state aid is based off of enrollments from the prior year. So that's an important element of it as well. While the state increases the PSA, the actual dollar amounts that we receive is based, one, on total enrollments of ours, and then in comparison to the other technical institutes, or technical colleges, excuse me, and then in comparison to in specific programs. So that funding formula has multiple layers to it, but again, the majority of our funding mechanisms are really tied to enrollments. That's why we spend and focus so much time and effort on that. Expenditures, there was changes in all of these categories related to the Perkins and to the federal funds. But again, it's all related to those dollars. So there was some changes related to a position that we were bringing on that is not going to take benefits. So that frees up some dollars to redirect that. So we made some changes in professional development areas. With the increased allocation, there's more capital expenditures, dollars that we have available. So we kind of reshifted around what we were doing with those federal Perkins dollars for equipment. Wages, just a little bit of change as we are going through the hiring process. We're increasing some contract lengths of replacement instructors, but the offset to that is it reduces our adjunct. So there's a win and a deduct, so to speak, as we make those changes. So again, overall revenue and expenditures, it's still a balanced budget, is only changing by about $7,000 from the previous presentation. Use of funds, talked about this a little bit before. Clearly we're a technical college, so we're heavy into the academics, and that's where the bulk of our resources are being spent. This changes from year to year just because we don't have a special capital outlay fund. Our capital expenditures are blended within that post-secondary fund. So you'll see a little bit of movement of that depending upon the size and scope of our capital projects. So a few years ago when we built the hub, that ratio would have looked much different because that was such a huge piece of it, that capital investment. As we look at it by the use of those funds from an object code, from an accounting terminology, again, heavily into wages and benefits. We're in the people business. So 66% of our expenditures are really tied to full-time, part-time staffing dollars and the related benefits associated with that. Again, capital investments change that from year to year, but generally it falls in that 65 to 70% range in human capital. Capital improvements, that's just, that remained unchanged. And again, just the split between building improvements and site improvements. Capital equipment, again, this was a little bit of an adjustment with the additional funds coming from Perkins. So last time you would have seen the land survey, so we're buying some equipment, some drones for that program, and moved around a little bit of the allocation between the new dental program and the new vet tech program. But again, utilizing the Perkins to the maximum extent. So the gray categories in there are the local dollars, and would be if for some reason the wheels fall off and enrollment starts to decline, but we still get our state appropriation, we'd still be able to buy this stuff, but we would use the state dollars for this and possibly make revenue adjustments and offset against this. This is probably the one that it was not completed last time. It was still a work in progress. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on this, and just a couple things I want to draw your attention to. If we look at the first column, FY20 projected, one of the things I wanted to mention in there is you see a reserve for FY21. Way our accounting structure is, we really don't reserve. The dollars are already reserved, but I wanted to point out that the related to the existing vet tech expansion, some of the Terry Avenue extension, some of those expenses haven't hit our ledger yet because of just the timing of it, of when that happens, but they're programmed in FY20. So what I wanted to demonstrate is, while if you were to exclude that out of there, you'd say, wow, we wound up, $2.2 million ahead. This is really a good year. We should have a pandemic every year. That's not the case. It's just a timing difference. And so I want to make sure that folks understand that probably in September, I'll be able to bring back in that as a supplemental appropriation using the reserves that we end up with this year. And by the time we get to September, we'll have a better measure of that. We get done doing our year-end entries, we'll know where we're at. Now, the upshot to that is, and this is another one of these conservative approaches, when we developed the FY20 budget and adopted that, that included a use of our existing reserves of about $885,000. If my projection, which should be a little more accurate this year since we're a little closer to the end of the year when I did it, right now it's only showing a utilization of $230,000. If that goes up a little bit in terms of the negative, it's because the 2555 will be coming down and we won't be carrying over as much. But the point I'm making is, overall, we are in a good position going into FY21 based on where we thought we were going to be in FY20 and where it looks like we're actually going to be. Some of that savings was in the early retirement. We had one time some money in there, $500,000, because of the changes in that. That utilization was probably half of that. So that's where we're picking up these categories. We're picking up categories just because people aren't there in terms of classroom supplies. So we're going to see some favorable variances in those categories, probably some pretty good variances in our utilities. So that's where we're picking up these types of dollars. They're one time, they're not going to be sustainable, but it also helps provide that buffer as we head into next year. So while I don't necessarily like adopting a 21 budget in September, I think there's a lot of variables out there that if we were to start to make decisions at this point in time, they're probably the wrong decisions. This gives us the appropriation to move forward, and then it allows us to come back in meet our obligation to fully adopt by September 30th, but looks a little more like what we think we're going to experience as we go into the year. So that's the point I wanted to point out on this. The other thing is when you get out to the end with our modeling, this is the way that typically looks. You get into that last year of it, it looks like we're insolvent. I think since I've been doing this for the last 12, 14 years, it always looks like the 5th year we're done. Never has happened, obviously, because you make adjustments as you go. But what really drives that decline into that negative fund balance is our capital equipment approach. We have been kicking the can down the road, so to speak, and buying the critical things that we need and deferring where we can. So if I defer this year, that has an effect that pushes everything out. So we keep pushing things out into that last year. And so when you see that capital investment jump from FY24 to 2.7 to 5.9, it's not a realistic number, but it's reflective of what's in our capital plan at this point in time. So we'll probably always see that unless we have a unique and dedicated funding mechanism for our capital. So that's why the 5th year always looks the worst. Probably more valuable as we look at FY22. We're still okay. We're still in a good position. And again, it's all going to come down to what happens this coming year on enrollment. Enterprise funds, no changes there. I think there's probably going to be an impact on the food service side of it based on the way we're going to be conducting some of our classes and the loads that we bring on to campus. If we start doing, you're here one day a week, but then the second day you're online, a lot of that depends on the individual instructor and the way they choose to deliver. So we'll see. I think there might be the possibility of some utilization of CARES funding for that to offset some of that. Because it is a loss of income that is really truly tied to disruption of campus operations. So we can probably supplant some of that lost revenue with the federal allocation that we'll receive. And this is just a breakout of how enterprise funds, so it differs from the post-secondary fund. Wages and benefits represent a smaller part because there's a lot of cost of goods sold in here. A lot more supplies purchases, a lot fewer staff serving. So that's why the wage and benefits percentage is much smaller on the enterprise funds. That's it at a very high level. Again, a lot of this is just a follow-up from the lengthy presentation I did back in May. The one change in the federal category in the revenue. Again, taking a conservative approach, leaving some dollars potentially on the table. If we see a decline in revenue or in enrollment, that enrollment's there, we'll look to program that and we'll start the argument about where we think that should go and have that ready to go so that we can present that in September. So, questions?
Should I open up for public hearing just quick? And
Yeah.
Since we have nobody, I'm opening it for public hearing. Seeing no one, we'll move on to questions, closing the public hearing. Questions. I'm looking at the capital expenses going forward. Are you over time taking into consideration, I'm just thinking of like the new tech building with the transfer from, so that's not in that budget at all. No. So, okay.
Not at this point. I think that's something that it will have to be conversations that we're having this year on what it's such a unique situation because it's really just a balance sheet transfer. I mean, the ownership and the title stays the same.
Right.
It's just moving it out of, and even it doesn't exist in a fund because it's on a government-wide statement. It's all a bunch of accounting mumbo jumbo, but it doesn't even change that. But it's how do we transfer that? Clearly, there's some value into it, or I would assume that the K-12 side would see that there's value to that building, and there should be some type of transfer. The really challenge for us is how do we afford it? How do we carry that on? How do we take that on? The operation side of it is easier. The capital investment side of it is more challenging, especially in the way we're structured. Our facilities are all funded and acquired for the most part by the Health and Education Facility Authority through the issuance of debts that they do system-wide. They are tapped out, or tapped out maybe is a better word to use. So there's a maximum amount that they're allowed in the legislature to carry as bonded debt. They're very close to that. I think that's why you saw the dollar increase this year, because there's also ratios that they're required to maintain in terms of debt service coverage ratios, so they need to generate a certain amount of revenue. So point being is it's not a resource that we can go to and look to.
Right.
At
And
this
so
point.
that's why maybe long-term planning with the district and
Yeah.
Dr. Statham and Todd to kind of come up with some type of
Yeah,
strategy.
and Todd and I have talked. We haven't put pen to paper on what those numbers look like. We've had the building appraised that Jeff Kreider and I put together and worked on and developed. So we have an appraised value on it. That doesn't necessarily mean, as you're well aware, that doesn't mean that's what the market value of it is. We're going to say it is, but we don't get to unilaterally determine that. So that's part of that conversation. And then the funding mechanism. Technical institutes, I suppose, from the school district standpoint, could possibly do a revenue bond. Generally, your bonds are GO, general obligation bonds, possibly a capital outlay certificate. But again, that's property tax supported dollars. So how do we write that arrangement that we're paying, that in effect we're paying for that purchase through the debt that you either choose to take on, or you have enough to fund it, where it becomes in simpler terms, a contract for deed type of an arrangement. So there's a lot of topics out there. There's a lot of discussion going on. Clearly, we're trying to look from our side of it, from a foundation standpoint. Are there partners out there that would be willing to come in with us from an investment standpoint? Is there interest in that? So we're exploring that. So there's a lot of balls in the air. There's kind of slow movement at this point, but that'll start to accelerate as we get closer, and that will have to be projected in our FY 22 budget. That'll be a part of it, whatever that decision is made. Typically, when I do the 5-year projections, I tend to just look at what do we know today that we're certain on it. You get into the what ifs, and I probably would never get it done because there's so many variables to it. So it's kind of reflecting, knowing what we know today, where we sit today. If we carried on this way, how would it look? And then we recognize that every year we come in and make those adjustments through the annual budget process, and then that again reflects. So it's not a true visionary of this is where we think we want to be. It's more about knowing what we know today. This is where we will be.
Thank you.
Rich, this is my first time getting to see your budget, so I have a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe you did cover it.
You didn't want to sit through the whole 40 minutes last time.
Well,
Sure.
on the revenue side,
Yeah.
Specifically that Perkins, the federal revenue, the 69,729. I see that is observed in the fiscal year 21 for that 23,698,000.
Mhm.
So when I go over to see how then it's reflected by category, I see that we have that in there at the top for the operating revenue, and we've observed that. And then we have the total revenue up by $1 million when you list it by category.
Which page are you looking at? Yeah.
And they're not numbered, so I'm not sure, but it looks like this. This one.
PowerPoint. Okay.
Yep, the PowerPoint.
Dan, which page so we can all be up?
Here, I'll flip it back here.
I was going to show it, what it looked like.
This page here,
Do you s-
correct?
Right. So you see underneath that starts out with that same number that you're carrying over from when you categorize the revenue and use the categories at the 23 million for fiscal year 21.
Okay.
And then it's observed under the fiscal year 21 budget, the revenue side of the 23. Then when it's carried down over the total revenue, it's at 24 million.
Oh. Yeah, that should stay the same. That should
Okay.
be 23.
Okay. And then,
And I'll tell you
and
what
then that
happened.
makes sense because then I
Yeah.
saw on the next,
Yep.
if you go to the first page of your
Yep.
vocational fund, this one was at the 23,698.
98,
So
right.
I wasn't sure which one
No.
you were going off.
No,
of,
it's
but I noticed that
23,698. I'll tell you what happened.
Okay.
I went to pull this PowerPoint off of the slide I had at home,
Okay.
and I pulled it up, and I go, oh crap, it's the wrong one.
Oh.
And so I started to make changes to my PowerPoint that I brought in today. It was reflected right on what was presented in your board documents.
Okay.
It wasn't in this PowerPoint that I presented. I didn't catch that one. So,
Okay.
but yes, the revenue is.
So the
is-
revenue is the 23 million as
698,
opposed to the
yes.
24.
Yes.
And then I didn't have time to quickly do if the expenses were they figured off the 23 or the 24.
It's the
So-
23. That's just a typo.
Okay, got it. Great.
Yeah, because the revenue and the expenditures in 21 are a balanced budget.
Okay,
So,
got it.
yeah, that was a typo on
Okay,
my
yeah,
part.
no,
So-
that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood that and I saw the
Mm-hmm.
purpose. And that's a one-time, is that a one-time revenue?
Perkins allocation changes year to year, but it's pretty steady in that $600,000 range,
You had
650.
covered that. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah, in the $650,000 range. There's an additional amount that comes in Perkins this year because we're part of a consortium.
Okay,
It's not the standard Carl V. Perkins allocation. It's an additional one, but it is still a Perkins reserve account. So that's why it's up a little bit.
got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good catch.
Other questions for Rich? Okay. Seeing none, do I have a motion to tentatively adopt the FY21 budget for Southeast Technical College?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We've tentatively adopted the FY21 budget. Thank you, Rich. Move on to the Higher Learning Commission Comprehensive Visit Prep Report. Thank you.
You shut it down.
President Mickelson, members of the board, my name is Phoenicia Foster. I'm serving in the Associate Dean position now of Curriculum Instruction. So I'll bring to you our update on our path to reaccreditation. I know I came, I think it was a year ago, April, and so this is a little bit similar, but to share with you the progress we've made and where we're headed this next year. So just as an awareness, we're part of the Higher Learning Commission. That's our regional accreditation. And there's the four pieces to that with the guiding values, assumed practices, federal compliance, and then the criteria for evaluation. So much of this will focus on our criteria for evaluation. So there are now two pathways. We are on the open pathway. This was what was we were transitioned to a couple of years ago. And so we're kind of at the end of this, but we were given an extra year a couple times. And so that's why it hasn't always followed that what year we're in. So with our assurance review, which happens in year 10, that's where we will explain how we comply with the criterion and core component. That's a very large document that has lots of pieces of evidence that comes with it. And that's what we're starting to develop here for the next couple of years. The second piece is the quality initiative. And so we had talked about some different ideas for that, but an update there is we applied and were accepted into HLC's Assessment Academy, which was supposed to start this past spring, but the start date has been postponed until the end of October. And that's a 4-year commitment that I'll explain a little bit more in just a minute. And then as far as that comprehensive evaluation, which will happen in 2022-23, that's where we have our federal compliance, we've got a student opinion survey, this large assurance document, and then there will I think it will end up being an on-site peer review visit. Mitchell Tech is doing theirs this fall, and they still, last I had talked to them, and maybe you all have an update, they weren't quite certain yet if that was going to be on-site or virtual, but we're not planning on this being delayed due to the pandemic. It sounds like it will carry on the timeline that we're given. So just as part of that assessment academy, it's a 4-year process, a great resource to be part of. It's a mix of in-person or now virtual on-campus or events that we're part of a cohort with some other institutions, and that will work with some assessment experts and scholars from across the country that will help us develop a project and pilot it, and we'll refine it and evaluate it, and then hopefully expand and sustain it on our campus. And so we'll be working with them starting this fall. We're working on identifying that team right now of 5 to 8 individuals from across campus, not just academics, but it will include IT and enrollment management and the business area, and then the academic representation as well. As far as our timeline, last year when I came to you, we were at that top level, and so we did do, prior to the pandemic, we did have some opportunities to reach out and educate, and we gave some different assignments to the various committees across campus and started collecting some information and some evidence that way. And then also in our M&M meetings, we were able to promote the criteria and do some engaging and interactive pieces through that. And so we got 3 of the 5 done before we ended up moving to the virtual, our virtual world. And then we did apply and were selected to the academy. So we made some great progress last year. This summer, what we're doing right now is there's the 5 criteria. So we're trying to establish those teams and create the co-chair arrangement. And so they'll start working, and I'll explain what their tasks are in just a minute. We should get our site visit date sometime this fall if it goes as scheduled. And those teams will continue to work this year with the goal of having a first draft of our assurance argument ready by next summer. So a little bit more explained timeline there as far as a month-by-month general idea of where we're going with the criterion teams meeting. I'll explain the HLC Engage tasks in just a moment, and then some as far as outlines and the assurance argument. So as far as those criterion teams, the purpose would be to collect the information and our evidence to address the components. We want to really identify our strengths and our areas of concern now, so we can try to shore those up prior to the visit, collect our evidence, and then ideally develop an outline. So these teams aren't going to be writing the whole piece, but giving an outline that then I can work to fill in. And so it's kind of the structure for that. I'm hoping by July 15th that we'll have those criterion teams in place so that we can get this launched this fall. And then because, budget's pretty exciting, but I've also taught math and physics, which aren't so exciting, right? So you always know that you got to generate a little bit of excitement. And to continue, because not everyone will be involved on those criterion teams, but we need everyone to be engaged in this process and to be knowledgeable, and we'll definitely need some of your expertise as well on different pieces of this. And so putting together this Engage challenge, and so working on a challenge for each of the criteria this next year in kind of a competitive, fun format, just maybe some scavenger hunts, trivia, kind of create a jingle kind of thing where we'll have some prizes throughout the year. And so that's to try and get everyone, it's not, and we hear it often, oh, it's for HLC. We just got to do this for HLC, but to see it's about equality and improving what we do and how we go about it. And so that's our wider initiative to get the campus involved. Any questions?
Well, thank you for all this work. I've worked on accreditation teams, and it's basically like professional stalking to gather all the information and get it in. So I know it's a lot of work. So thank you for that. And especially in today's world, it makes it a little more difficult sometimes to track down that information when people aren't working in the same buildings and so forth. But what this will do, if we do all the work on the forefront, will allow us to not have to be doing this as often and reap the rewards of being reaccredited by the HLC. So thank you for all your work that you're doing on this.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think sometimes it's, even in the nursing world, we say if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, and so it's really just documenting the great work that you're already doing, and obviously finding those challenges that we're having too and finding ways to improve those. But it is a lot of paperwork and a lot of writing down stuff that maybe seems obvious or seems kind of like a duh moment, but you still have to account for it. So thank you for, that's not always an easy task. And so to be able to take other people's documents and then kind of elaborate on them and make them complete documents is a talent. So thank you for your work. And I think some of your approaches as far as trying to get everybody involved, it is important that people know they want to go to a quality school and they want to go to a quality program, and so they can be part of making sure that their feedback is heard too. So.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to acknowledge the report on the reaccreditation?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and second. All those in favor of tentative or approval of the report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Benjamin, thank you.
Good morning, President Mickelson, members of the board. We wanted to provide you with an update on academics. You see how important it is on our budget, as Rich presented, to have student engagement. And it's also important to realize that our students are hands-on students. Many of the students expect that face-to-face, and they come to Southeast Tech because we provide that. So our goal is to ensure that our students have a very safe environment, our faculty have a safe environment, and we're able to meet those learning objectives for both accreditation and continued enrollment of the school. So we want to just kind of give you an update of things that we're doing to ensure that we can continue to move forward with as much of a traditional, normal, if there is such a term anymore, start for the fall as possible. So we presented last month at the last board meeting our phases to reopening, things like wearing masks and ensuring that we have proper equipment and sanitation and everything in place. We've also gone a step further in academics, where we've really looked at each individual classroom and determined how many students can we fit? How do we set this classroom up for instruction, and how do we ensure students can interact with an instructor? One of the approaches we're doing, we're giving faculty several different resources and tools to do that. One is what we call a bimodality form of education, where the instructor can simultaneously teach to students in class and online at the exact same time. So they can have half the class there and half at home online. A little bit more challenging because it's really having to interact and how do you engage those students. We do have a lot of faculty that are trained on it, and I think we do very well, but that's one option. The other option, again, is splitting the class in half. Classes typically are Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, twice a week, or half to come on Monday, half come on Wednesday. And they present the same lecture twice in the week. And then what they typically would do on the Wednesday class, it's all online. So the kind of a hybrid model. I think that's the model that most of our instructors are going to take, with being able to present, interact, and ensure student interaction and the learning objectives. The other component is the formation of the academic leadership team, that we'll be able to really track and monitor the quality of the education, that the learning management system is being properly used, that information is being compiled and students are being engaged, so that we are meeting our learning objectives. We really feel this multi-pronged approach is really going to ensure a strong quality education, where we're able to keep students engaged and ensure that we can deliver all of the objectives. We're also planning and preparing for the unlikely event, or just in case we end up having to go completely online. And we have things in place that we're working on with faculty and staff, that students can continue to get that same experience. So we're hoping that we don't have to implement those, but something that we're prepared for. Questions?
If they are doing the hybrid model, I'm sorry, thank you. If they are doing the hybrid model, will those classes, say the ones that are in person, still also be videotaped for?
Yes.
Okay.
So when they do the hybrid model, what the instructor will do is they'll videotape their lecture, post it online, so all students can see it. So it actually works out somewhat to an even a higher advantage, because if you have a student, because of life, everything, they tend to miss a class, work, family, they still lose out now. Right now, they kind of lose out, and they have to make that opportunity or that time to meet with the instructor or fellow classmate. They can get all that now. So it really is a stronger form of delivery.
It's a great service for the students.
Well, and for some students, there may be lectures that they would like to re-listen to as well. You know, maybe they were distracted by whatever, or they didn't catch a topic or concept or something. And so for them to have the ability to go back, I think is good. We might also, I think we hear a lot from the people who want to come back, but we may also have students who can't for whatever reason. And so if they chose to do just online, they would still have that option to listen to the one that they maybe would have attended in person, but then also still get that second day online as well and be able to participate and interact. So yeah, I think having those multiple options available will be very helpful for students to kind of choose their path for whatever works for them personally.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Benjamin? Seeing none, do I have a motion to acknowledge the academic affairs update on fall semester start?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The report is acknowledged. Any other business? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you.